A major investigative article about the CIA and a classified UAP crash retrieval program was quietly removed from one of the largest news outlets in the world. No correction, no contact with the authors, no explanation. The journalists who co-wrote it found out after it was already gone. Chris Sharp co-wrote a detailed investigative article for the Daily Mail alongside journalist Josh Broswell and researcher Matt Ford. That piece laid out how the CIA's Office of Global Access, known as the OGA, was allegedly connected to UAP crash retrieval operations, mapping out which agencies coordinated and how. Then, without any warning to its authors, it was gone. Here's what Sharp said to Stephen Diener on the UAP podcast.
If it has been taken down due to like a complaint or national security or something like that, first, it's strange because it's been up a number of years now, so it's already out there. That train's passed,
Yeah.
And then secondly, if that does happen, I mean, it becomes a bigger story. It becomes a much bigger story.
So what was in that article that made it worth removing now? They did not just name the OGA, they detailed the structure, how elite military special forces, Department of Energy components, and CIA leadership under the Director of Science and Technology were all reportedly working in coordination on retrieval operations. The OGA, Sharp explained, is built precisely for reaching assets in hostile or extremely hard to access locations. If you needed to recover a craft from a remote site, those are the operations you would call. And that level of structural detail, who, where, and how it all connects, appeared to have what made this piece different from others that have stayed up. And this was also not the first time Sharp explained pushback tied to his UAP reporting. When the OGA article was first published, his co-author Matt Ford was approached by a stranger in Las Vegas in what Sharp describes as a threatening encounter. On that exact same day, Sharp's computer lost internet access on a single device while other devices in his home had full signal. His service provider could not identify the cause, and he eventually had to replace his machine altogether. And the night he discussed the article's removal publicly, someone was actively attempting to log into his email remotely in real time. Sharp described what happened around the original OGA article publication this way.
And obviously, when we released the Office of Global Access story, Matt Ford receives kind of like a threat when he's in Las Vegas from this random person, and then my internet goes down on my computer and it never fully recovers. It's kind of like every other like on that exact day when the article comes out, my internet goes down.
As you can guess, Sharp was not alone in describing this kind of pressure. Jeffrey Nusatelli, who testified before Congress in September of 2025 about the Vandenberg Space Force Base, stated publicly that his home had been broken into days leading up to his congressional testimony. He viewed it as a direct message. Sharp's broader read on all of this is that some very powerful people are now holding more influence than they previously did, and that is the pattern of signals, not all of them coincidental, that reflects a specific kind of resistance. Now that brings us directly to J.D. Vance, Peter, Thiel, and something Sharp said that doesn't come up often enough in this conversation, so don't go anywhere. Vance recently told podcast host Benny Johnson that he, in his own words, is obsessed with UFOs, that it was among the first things on his list when he entered office. Then he stated he believes UFOs may be demonic in nature. But Sharp's read on why Vance is positioned where he is takes the conversation somewhere different, and he stated this.
You want to make sure that you're putting all your people in the right positions. So let's have a look at J.D. Vance, for example. I think he was running in Ohio or something like that for Senate, and he was losing. And then all of a sudden, he was given one of the biggest campaign donations in history by Peter Thiel. And just so happened that J.D. Vance used to work for Peter Thiel. And I believe that Peter Thiel has got his people in positions deliberately, let's say. And part of the reason is so they can have access to this stuff.
Sharp extended that line of thinking to another Thiel associate, Michael Kratsios, a former Thiel chief of staff who now serves as a science advisor to the president. Sharp traced that role historically back to the Vannevar Bush's position in the 1940s, the same era when the classification architecture around sensitive technology programs were first constructed. The argument Sharp is making is very interesting here. He is saying that a deliberate network of people with a specific interest in UAP-related technology is being placed in positions where access to that information becomes possible. Whether or not you find that credible, the connection Sharp names are on public record. AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, was established by Congress to investigate UAP incidents and report transparency to the public. Sharp's assessment, gathered from multiple sources over time, is that it was a failure built into the design from the very start. AARO was housed under the office under the Secretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, that is the OUSDI, the very body responsible for protecting some of the most sensitive classified programs in the entire defense structure. Chris Mellon and Lou Elizondo both say publicly it should have never been placed there.
It was a failure by design when the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security got involved, being the home to, as it was known before it became the AARO, as AOIMSG. People were telling me, people who knew what the situation was were telling me that it would be a death by 1,000 cuts. And people actually publicly were speaking about it. Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo were all saying it should not go with an OUSDINS, because that's the place where the ultimate resistance is.
Sharp also noted the classification wall AARO kept running into. When witness Dylan Borland brought AARO 3 drawings, 2 of which were already classified by other agencies, AARO had no authority to discuss them further. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, or similar bodies, could simply declare that material off limits, and AARO had no route around that. But beyond that structural problem, Sharp conducted his own separate interview with Tim Phillips, a former acting head of AARO.
There were about 50 cases, and they couldn't explain it. It wasn't adversary, it wasn't American tech. And Tim basically said they had the best people with the best knowledge when it comes to kind of like identifying this, and who knew what they were talking about when it came to identifiable known systems. And he was just saying they couldn't work this out.
Tim Phillips describing roughly 50 cases that would not be attributed to any known human technology. That's not some crazy claim. That came from within the office. So given AARO's structural limitations and those 50 unexplained cases, do you think a replacement office would actually change anything? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Sharp also raised something that puts all of this into a different context entirely. The pressure towards disclosure may not be coming from Capitol Hill at all. It may be coming from something far more immediate.
It can't go on for much longer, because China may be making breakthroughs in terms of reverse engineering that are very alarming. The US may be seeing certain capabilities coming out of China, which do suggest that they're on the verge of making a breakthrough, or have already made a breakthrough. And due to like the stovepiping and stuff like that, and the fact that it's really difficult to access these craft, the US isn't making as much progress as China anymore. And from my understanding, what I've been told, kind of like admitting and coming clean that they do have these exotic craft of unknown origin.
If that is accurate, classifying the basic existence of these programs no longer protects a strategic advantage. What remains worth protecting, according to what Sharp was told, is derived technology, anything developed through reverse engineering efforts. But acknowledging the craft themselves, the argument being made to Sharp is that restricting access to study those materials, while adversaries potentially study the same ones, only narrows whatever leads the US may have. If powerful private interests are positioning themselves for access to private UAP materials at the same time, key reporting is being removed from public view. So where does that leave actual public accountability?